What's growing on, gardeners? Don't let the cold weather fool you. It is already seed starting season, and if you haven't begun the process, you may already be falling behind. On today's video, I'm going to share with you the 9 biggest mistakes that gardeners make when they start their seed. It's not just new gardeners that make these mistakes, even experienced gardeners are guilty of some of these things. And on today's video, I'm going to help you avoid disaster.
If you're new to the channel, please subscribe, hit the bell for notifications, and check out my Amazon store and Spreadshop links in the video description for everything I use in my garden and awesome custom apparel and gear.
Mistake number 1 that so many gardeners make is that they start their warm season crops from seed far too early. And when I say warm season crops, I specifically mean crops that are sensitive to frost and freeze, like tomatoes, peppers, eggplants, zucchini, cucumbers, other squashes, and things like that we commonly start as transplants and then transplant them out into our spring garden. The issue with these plants is, because they are sensitive to frost and freeze, you cannot plant them out into your garden until all chance of frost and freeze has sufficiently passed. So if you start them too early, they can get to the point where they become absolutely enormous. And if you're like me and you start dozens of plants, when they are this big, they can become an absolute nightmare to manage. Now, typically, I like to start my tomatoes, peppers, and other warm season plants in these little 3-inch square pots, and then I put them into 18 tray containers, and then I can have all of my peppers and tomatoes sitting comfortably in only about 6 trays, and I can easily manage them and carry them outside when temperatures warm to acclimate them, and they don't take up a ton of space. But if I mistime things and I plant things 2 or 3 weeks too early and they outgrow these containers, look at the size difference. You're dealing with an absolute nightmare in space. Where are you going to put them all? How are you going to carry them outside and acclimate them to the real sun if you started them indoors? It is a monster headache. Warm season transplants should generally be handled as follows. For your tomatoes, your peppers, your eggplants, and other nightshades, usually from the day you sow that seed, it takes 6 to 8 weeks for them to germinate and become full-size transplants. So find your last average frost date and subtract 6 to 8 weeks from that date. That is when you should generally be sowing your first seeds. For things like your cucurbits, your cucumbers, your squash, your melons, they only take 3 to 4 weeks to grow from seed, germinate, and form full-size transplants. So you really don't want to rush them. Generally speaking, in most cases, it is better to start your warm season vegetables a week or 2 late and get them out into the garden a week or 2 after your last chance of frost than to risk planting them too early and have to shuffle them back and forth, or even worse, you plant them out into your garden because you can't control the size anymore and you get a late frost or freeze and you lose everything. Mistake number 2 is the total opposite side of the coin, and that is you're starting your cool season transplants too late. Now, your cool season transplants are the things that you transplant out into your garden that are tolerant of hard frosts and freezes. Things like cabbage, bok choy, kale, broccoli, lettuce, and other things like that that are more heat sensitive than they are cold sensitive. Now, when you start your cool season transplants from seed, like you see right here, it's actually important that we get them out into our garden when it's still a little bit chilly, because we need to get these things to mature in our garden before the heat of the summer gets here. That's because it is the heat of the summer that actually is a bigger threat than the cold of the late winter, early spring. That's because heat makes a lot of these cool season crops do a thing called bolting. When it gets too hot, they send up their seed tops. They flower and they go to seed, and the plants become bitter and they don't taste very good anymore. So it is actually in your best interest to get these plants out a few weeks too early than a few weeks too late. And if you're going to just get yourself a late season hard freeze, all you have to do is cover them with some type of agricultural fabric and they will be just fine. We have been getting brutalized with cold this winter, and all of my cool season crops are underneath this agricultural fabric. They have been absolutely fine, despite the fact that we've had several 19-degree nights, and it is going to be even colder next week. Now, unfortunately, there is a caveat in areas that have really hot summers, like we get here in the Southeast, Florida, Texas, the Gulf Coast, and the desert Southwest. Sometimes the summers are so oppressive that a lot of our warm season crops cannot survive. For example, where I grew up in New Jersey and Pennsylvania, it was always better to plant my tomatoes out about 2 weeks past the last chance of frost, because the summers were mild and temperate and the tomatoes could grow fine all throughout the summer. The biggest risk was, what if we get a late frost or something like that? So it was better to delay. But I can't do that now that I live in the Southeast. Because our disease pressure, heat and humidity is so bad here, my tomatoes will fail to pollinate in June, and generally by early August all my tomato plants are dead. So if I actually delay my planting by a couple of weeks, they will not set an adequate crop and they will die before I get a good harvest. So if that sounds like you really need to learn how to nail the timing of some of your summer crops, because your summers are just too hot to keep them alive year round. So you may be wondering, how am I supposed to figure all this stuff out? Well, I'm here to tell you that the only way you're going to figure it out is by actually doing this. You have to plant and experiment and then journal. Write down the dates that you put things into the ground and then figure out, did I plant them too early or too late? And by actually doing this process, you will get great at it after a few years. When I moved here to North Carolina, it took me 3 or 4 years to figure out the climate, but now I have it nailed, and I use things like shade cloth in my garden in the dead of the summer, and I get an extra month or 2 of life out of my plants. So please don't expect perfection. If you do, you'll only disappoint yourself. All the fun in gardening is the learning process and the journey. So just enjoy yourself, give these things a try, and you will fine-tune it over time. Mistake number 3 that so many gardeners make starting seed is not overseeding their transplanting containers. Overseeding is the act of placing more than one seed in each individual cell. And the reason why we must do this is because seeds do not have 100% germination rates. Depending on the age and how well you've stored your seed, seeds usually germinate somewhere in the 50 to 90% range. So if all you do is sow one seed per individual container or seed cell, you're going to have a lot of blanks, things where nothing comes up. Now these are some kale transplants that I seeded, and as you can see, this is a 6-cell tray, but there are a lot more than 6 plants here. That's because I make sure to place more than one seed per cell, because it's a lot easier to have more than I need come up and then just individually thin them, which means cut off the weakest of the plants and keep the strongest one, than it is to have a lot of wasted real estate where nothing comes up. So my general rule of thumb is this: if you are sowing very small seeds or very cheap seeds, like a lot of your kale seeds, your onion seeds, your lettuce seeds, where you get hundreds of seeds in an individual pack, I like to put 3 or 4 per individual seed cell or container. That way I'm pretty much guaranteed that something comes up, but I'm not going to get so many plants coming up that they're crowding themselves out and they're difficult to thin. Now obviously for your more expensive seeds like your tomatoes, your peppers, your eggplant, where you may spend a quarter to $1 a seed, you don't want to place 3 to 4 in each container. You'll be wasting too much money. So for your tomatoes and your peppers and your other more expensive seed, I like to place 2 per individual container. That should hedge your bet. And if you're buying really expensive F1 hybrid seed where it's something like $1 a seed, if that's still too expensive for you, you can place 1 seed per container and then place an extra seed every other. So you're basically sowing 1.5 seeds per container, and if you have blanks where things don't come up, what you could then do is then take individual containers where 2 of them come up and then just cut them or separate the individual seedlings and then move them over, and you'll have 2 transplants. So that way you won't have any wasted real estate long term. Mistake number 4 that so many gardeners make when starting seed is they are not using a seedling heat mat and a heat mat thermostat to start their seeds. Seeds require very specific soil temperatures in order to germinate. So if you don't have the right soil temperature, you are going to get spotty germination, or you may not get any germination at all. For example, if you were to grow something like a very hot pepper, like a Carolina Reaper, a ghost pepper, a habanero, they may not even germinate if you don't have some type of warming pad underneath your transplant trays. But regardless, no matter what you are starting from seed, everything is going to germinate at a higher percentage, and they're going to germinate a lot faster if you have that soil temperature properly dialed in. When you use a seedling heat mat on most of your tomato or your pepper starts, they will usually germinate in about half the time. Tomato and peppers will take anywhere from about 10 to 14 days usually to germinate if you just leave them at room temperature. If you use a seedling heat mat, you are going to get tomato germination in as little as 5 days and pepper germination in as little as 6 to 7 days. And you're going to have a higher percentage of success. So not only will you be saving money with seeds, but you're going to get faster results. A lot of gardeners are resistant to investing in seedling heat mats and seedling heat mat thermostats because they think that they are an unnecessary expense that they don't need. But I'm here to tell you that is nonsense. They are extremely affordable, bordering on dirt cheap, and they are going to last you many, many years. My initial seedling heat mats are probably 7 or 8 years old. My thermostat is 4 or 5 years old, and they are as good as new. I use them all throughout the year, and they show no signs of letting up. They are a one-time expense. After that, they are probably going to pay for themselves in a single season or two because they are so effective. You are going to get so much increased germination rates, and your plants are going to germinate so much faster that you're going to save so much time and money on seeds. They're going to pay for themselves in no time. If you don't know where to get affordable seedling heat mats and thermostats, I'll place some links down in the video description for your convenience. Mistake number 5 that so many gardeners make when starting seeds is they do not provide the seedlings with intense enough light after they germinate. This is especially problematic when starting seeds indoors underneath grow lights. Folks, do not confuse grow lights with the sun. The sun's energy is so intense that from 93 million miles away, it will give you a sunburn. Your grow lights have next to no intensity. You can't leave them feet above your seedlings, or else they will grow tall and leggy and stringy trying to reach for that light. Take a good hard look at how close those grow lights are to those seedlings that you see right there. You should be installing these grow lights 2 to 4 inches above the seedlings. Because the grow lights lack intensity, you need what intensity is there to be as close to the leaves as possible. Otherwise, the plants will grow tall and leggy, trying to desperately reach for that light, and you will have ugly, spindly seedlings that could fail on you because they could be so weak they could crash right over. The other thing you must understand is how long these grow lights must run in order for the plants to collect enough energy for them to properly photosynthesize. If these plants were growing outside in the true sun, in order for them to be grown in what is defined as full sun conditions, they would only need 6 hours of uninterrupted, unfiltered sun a day. That's all it takes for things to be considered grown in full sun. But if you only gave the plants 6 hours of these grow lights running, they would become leggy and sickly. What you actually need to do is run your grow lights for 16 hours every single day. And in order to accomplish that, I use a remote timer that is controlled via an app on my phone. It is set to turn on every morning at 6 a.m. and off every evening at 10 p.m. That's 16 hours on, 8 hours off. And I run the seedling heat mat on the exact same schedule until everything germinates. It should be noted that if you are using a seedling heat mat, and you should, once things appropriately germinate, you should no longer run the seedling heat mat because it can accelerate growth so much that it can make them take off and grow at a faster rate than the grow lights can provide light. So your seedlings can actually become too leggy if you leave the seedling heat mat on for too long after things germinate. And again, for all these different things that I'm using right here, I'll place links to them down in the video description for your convenience. Please keep in mind you can run into a lot of these same problems if you are starting your seedlings in front of window lighting and not using grow lights. Now, this is going to vary from window to window because we're not going to know what the intensity and the duration of the sunlight is coming through your window. What you will have to do is monitor your seedlings, and if they look like they are getting leggy or growing towards the window, and as they grow into the window they get long and spindly, it's probably because they are either not getting strong enough sunlight, they're not getting enough sunlight in terms of duration, or both. Most likely both. And if that is the case, you're going to either have to start carrying them outside to give them true sunlight, or you're going to have to buy a supplemental grow light to give them additional intensity. Mistake number 6 that many gardeners make is that they overwater their plants, and this can lead to a fungal disease called damping off. A fungal disease will colonize in the soil, and then it will eat away at the very fragile seedlings, and they will wither away and die. It is terrible. It can kill all of your seedlings. And this is most likely to happen when using a standard seed starting mix, either made out of cocoa coir or peat moss or some other similar medium like that. And that is because they tend to hold a lot of water. So the best way that you can combat against damping off disease if you were using a medium like that is to simply not overwater your plants. Let the top inch dry out, because if you let the tops of your plants dry out before you water them, it makes it very difficult for that fungal disease to colonize in the soil. But keep in mind, you still have to keep an eye on the plants and not let the seed cells completely dry out, otherwise all of your seedlings will die. The very fragile roots are limited to the amount of moisture at the bottom of that container, so you can't let it dry out completely. Another thing you can do to combat damping off disease is to grow your plants in vermiculite, because vermiculite has natural antimicrobial properties. It makes it very hard for damping off disease to grab hold. So for example here, all of these onions and shallots that I have in here, they're actually growing in vermiculite. And because of that, I won't really have to worry about damping off disease because of the antimicrobial factors. Now, the problem with using pure vermiculite is it's difficult for a root ball to form. So you probably don't want to start in pure vermiculite unless it is a very, very hardy plant like an onion that can tolerate the roots falling apart. So if you find yourself to be a chronic overwaterer and you can't seem to control it, one thing you can do is you can fill your seed cells with a soil-based mix, but leave about it an inch low, and then after your seedlings germinate in the soil, you can top off the last inch of that cell with pure vermiculite, and the vermiculite will be like an antimicrobial mulch to try and prevent that damping off disease from developing. That has been successful for many different gardeners. And a final strategy is to start your seedlings in something like this. These are peat pellets, and because they come completely dried and you have to hydrate them, they are a sterile medium. So when you get started, these are going to be basically sterilized, and it makes it a lot harder for damping off disease to grab hold. Now keep in mind, once they are exposed to the environment, any fungal disease like that could eventually colonize them. So if you're constantly overwatering, this is not foolproof, but I have found this method to be a lot more foolproof than the standard potting mixes that you get at the store. I think they are the most likely to get damping off disease. So if you're a heavy-handed waterer, please keep that in mind. Mistake number 7 that so many gardeners make is that they fail to properly and adequately fertilize their seedlings after they germinate. When your plants first germinate, it's the actual coating on the seed itself that is providing the nutrients to the plants. But that's only a little bit of nutrients. Eventually, they are going to run out. And if you don't fertilize the plants, they will die because they will run out of nutrients. Now, many people ask, when do you fertilize your plants? And the rule of thumb is once they form their first set of true leaves. So if you look at this plant right here, this little leaf right here, this is not a true leaf down here. The only purpose of this leaf is to push up and break ground. These leaves that you see right here that are larger and curling, they are the true leaves of the plant. So because they have true leaves, they need to be fertilized. And if you still have trouble figuring out what's a true leaf and what is just for breaking ground, generally speaking, they will need fertilizer at some point about 10 to 14 days after they germinate. The next question is, what kind of fertilizer should I give my plants? And that should be a balanced, water-soluble fertilizer. You shouldn't be giving your little seedlings in small trays some kind of organic granular fertilizer that needs soil microbiology to break it down, because we're growing them in these little tiny seed starts. The microbiology just isn't there, so those fertilizers aren't going to really work. You want something that you can mix and stir into water and then place on the plants, and it's already been broken down so they can immediately uptake those nutrients. Now that being said, should I use an organic water-soluble fertilizer or something not organic? And my answer to this question is, it depends on your scenario. If you have some big outdoor starting greenhouse or something, you can be completely organic because Who cares if the inside of a greenhouse stinks? But if you're like me and you're growing your seedlings inside your house, much less in your office, I only use water-soluble, synthesized, non-organic fertilizers because they don't stink. My favorite here is Jack's 20-20-20. Now, a lot of people may be saying that's not organic, and that is true, but I'm here to tell you, if you've ever purchased your seedlings from any nursery or any big box store or any stand on the side of the road, they almost certainly gave their plants this. So I think it's okay to not be 100% organic just to get your transplants up and running. And then when you transplant them out into your garden, you can be 100% organic from there. I think that is going to make the most sense for most people in most situations. How much fertilizer should we give our seedlings? The general answer to that question is anywhere from a quarter to a half strength serving. Now, when using this water-soluble fertilizer that you see right here, a full strength serving that you give to an outdoor plant is 1 tablespoon of this fertilizer into 1 gallon of water and then mix well. Now, what we have right here is a 1 quart measuring watering can, so this is a quarter of a gallon. So if we were to give them a full strength serving, this would be 3/4 of a teaspoon to a quart of water. Now, because I want to give them a fractional serving, I'm only going to give them about 1/4 of a teaspoon, which is going to be 1/3 of the recommended full strength serving. So this is about 1/3 to 1/4. That's close enough to eyeball it. So we're going to mix it really well. And it's good to be conservative here because we don't want to burn our plants by using too strong a fertilizer too quickly. And now we are going to water in our seedlings. And when it comes to frequency, how often should I do this? I think that once a week is good enough, but ultimately you are going to have to eyeball your seedlings and make sure that they aren't developing any nutrient deficiencies. If you see the plants are becoming yellow looking from a lack of nitrogen or some other type of deficiency, then you may need to up that frequency. But generally speaking, doing this once a week is roughly enough to give the plants what they need to grow into nice, strong transplants. Mistake number 8 that many gardeners make is one of the most overlooked of all, and that is not giving your seedlings that are started indoors a breeze. There are 2 things that lead your plants to being stout and strong: giving them intense light and giving them a breeze that they have to fight against. One of the ways that seedlings thicken up in nature is to actually fight against the breeze. So when you have an oscillating fan set up running for about 3 to 4 hours a day, that is a great way to simulate a natural breeze, and it leads to stronger, thicker, healthier seedlings. If you do not do this, your plants will likely be spindly when you transplant them outside. And that might not be a big deal for things like lettuces and such, but if you were growing tomatoes, peppers, eggplant, or things that grow upright and they haven't had to fight a breeze indoors, when you get your first windy day, they are likely to snap if you don't stake them adequately. So please, make sure you have some kind of breeze like you see with this oscillating fan right here. This is one of the secret weapons to having beefy, stout, tough seedlings. And mistake number 9 that so many gardeners make when they start their own plants from seed is they fail to properly acclimate or harden off their seedlings before they transplant them out into their garden. Whether you're starting your seedlings underneath a grow light, in a greenhouse, by a sunny windowsill, they all have one thing in common: they are not exposed to the full spectrum of the sun. If you are using grow lights to grow your plants, they're only getting a very narrow band of spectrum to grow. They're getting the bare minimum of what they need to put on growth and go through their life processes. If they are growing in front of a window or in a sunroom or underneath greenhouse polycarbonate or greenhouse plastic, they are blocking a lot of the sun's spectrum, particularly the UV spectrum. So if you started all of your seeds indoors or in some type of enclosure and then you plant them out in full sun, they are going to get roasted by the infrared and the UV radiation of the true sun. There is no better way to end your entire season before it starts than to rush your seedlings that are not acclimated out into your garden. That can literally kill all of them in no time flat. What you want to do is slowly acclimate them using the weak morning sun and the weak evening sun. So, for example, the first time you bring your transplants out into sun, you want to bring them out right at sunrise and leave them out for about an hour or two, then carry them back inside. Then carry them outside again in the evening for the last 1 to 2 hours of sunlight. The weak morning and evening sun in the late winter, early spring is not going to burn your plants, but the midday and afternoon sun will. Over time, you're going to extend that to 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening, then 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the evening. You're going to do this over the course of 10 to 14 days until they can finally stand out in the full sun. Now, what do you do if you work full time and you just don't have the time to baby your seedlings like that? Well, the best thing to do is to wait for overcast weather like you see right here. It was raining and drizzly all day. So in this case, what you'd want to do is, if you're home, you'd want to carry out your seedlings under full overcast sky, making very careful and sure that you carry them in if you get breaks of sun and suddenly the cloudy skies go away and turn into clear skies. Don't make that mistake, please. But this is the best weather that you can do this. Also, another option is you can bring them out under the dappled light of shade trees, or put them outside but under some kind of roof cover like a soffit to slowly acclimate them into full sun. Whatever you do, please don't rush this process and take your time. And that right there are the 9 biggest mistakes that gardeners make when starting plants from seed, and how to avoid them for incredible success growing your own vegetable garden. So everybody, I sure hope you found this video helpful. If you did, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and please ring that notification bell so you're notified when I release more videos like these. If you're curious about any of the products that I featured or listed in this video, I placed direct links down in the video description for all of them for your convenience. For everything else that I use in real life in my garden, they are all linked in my Amazon storefront. So expand the video description, click on the Amazon storefront link, and you'll see everything I use in real life. And while you're down there, please check out my spread shop for custom merch if you want to support the channel. Thank you all so much for watching, and I hope to see all of you again on the next video. We are having a much better walk today because I got Dale a brand new leash. Our original trusty leash broke after many years, and we had to use a different backup leash, and it was only 6 feet long, and it was terrible because we kept tripping over each other non-stop because Dale loves to zigzag all over and sniff everywhere. So now we got ourselves an 8-foot leash, and everything is so much better. We are not tripping over each other, and Dale feels like he has a little bit more freedom, and he is just being, a good boy. No peas, Dale. No, not on people's landscaping. Oh, you got me distracted. That was Daddy's fault. He should have been paying attention.